All right, welcome, Rowe Morrow. Say hi.
Hi, Rowe. Lovely to have you here.
Okay, so our apologies to everybody for all of the technical glitches. We're going to go to speakerphone because we can't seem to connect Rowe, which is a great pity. But Rowe, a couple of weeks back we spoke about the need for permaculture to shift from me to we. Would you like to share your thoughts on that?
Oh, yes, Meg, and I'm sorry everyone we were held up. It's just infuriating, as you all know, and if you're still there and patiently waiting, thank you very much for doing it. Look, we did talk about moving from me to we. Now, this isn't just a thought I've had. It actually comes out of some evidence. I've just written the first half of the outcomes from teaching in refugee camps. And the refugee camps in Asia have done hundreds of thousands of times better in spreading permaculture and scaling it up and getting good results and transforming the camps than those of European westernized cultures. And I was thinking what happens in Asia quite often. You'll say, well, everyone come out and help build a wildlife corridor on the verge on Saturday. And someone will say, no, I'm not doing that. And why should I? And no, I'm taking the kids to soccer. I don't do that. And if I find with Asians, the willingness to work together is so far in advance of what we'll do. Now, permacultures do it pretty well. And of course, we've got all the lovely permablitzers. But I'm starting to think that we need more and more occasions to bring us together, to work together, to know the value of the we. That's sort of what I was thinking, Meg, when I said this, that also permaculture's often been taught to groups of anything from 14 to 50 students individually, and they go home and do their own garden and their own plan and their own something. And although they work in a group, they go home and do their own. I think the individualistic culture is not good if we really want to be coping and managing and things like global emergency and climate change and not break through those planetary boundaries.
Yeah, I noticed recently when you spoke with Dan Palmer, you talked about how we need to start designing beyond our site. And I thought that was a great observation, that, you know, we have this notion of designing within property boundaries and we need to move beyond that.
Yes, I mean, the first instance, the gentlest way of doing that would be simply to just consider light, shade, sun, pests, having an impact outside. Normally, in our sector analysis, we look at what happens outside impacting on us or me. But maybe there should be some sort of internal sector analysis that says, how good is this going to be for my neighbour or neighbourhood or whatever we've got there.
Yeah, we've actually included a stage in our sector analysis, Row, where we treat the planet as a client, and we ask what does the planet need, as well as what does the human client need. Row, you're working on the third book, and it's been renamed. Why the need for a third edition?
Well, the first one, Meg, was in 96, and then about a decade later, 2006, I did the next one. But what has happened since then has been the most extraordinary transformation in the world. It's been really quite amazing. And it's happened in many things. So first of all, I've learned that NGOs in other countries love to have some material to translate. So we needed a global book, that book Western. And I almost couldn't see it, the way you can't see your own culture and you'll say we haven't got culture. I couldn't see how Western culture it was and how stuck it was, always drawing a chicken, a cow, a goat instead of maybe a guinea pig or a buffalo or a donkey or a camel. You know, it was just getting stuck into a colonial mould that I couldn't see. So many of the examples in the new book are taken from right across the world, all sorts of different cultures. We're drawn on the Middle East, drawn on Asia, drawn on Africa, to think about how we can use more of what they do and how they can take permaculture, and it's easily adaptive. It's not a big stretch. So there was the need to globalise the book. And I'm not sure I've got there. Secondly, the world's changed. The amount of evidence coming out for permaculture now is ginormous. It is mammoth. The things that people will say and tell you, and you say, yes, well, I learned that 40 years ago, or I knew that. So that to accommodate the evidence, and it doesn't read as if, so-and-so has discovered what Bill said is true, but take one example, the Sustainable Development Goals, 17?
Yes.
Well, about 13 or 16 of those actually are the global problems specified by Mollison and Holmgren way back in the early 70s. So suddenly they're discovered and they become planetary boundaries, or they become sustainable development goals. But the other thing is to bring permaculture and those goals into closer alignment so that we can use what the UN and others are doing, and the UN can use what permaculture has in terms of evidence, practice, and design methods. So there's a need for that. And then there is the need to include all the things that we've consolidated in permaculture. So if you look at regen ag, and I said to you, what are the indicators for regen ag?
Yes.
Perhaps you'd talk about Joel Salatin, and perhaps you'd talk about Fukuoka. What we've done is draw those people together whose names are known. There's an Asian, there's a European, there's American. And then say, what is it they did? Okay, what did they do? They planted into the last crop. What did they do? They planted the environment for water and windbreaks. What did they do? They build soil, they build species, and they rotate by observation, not prescription.
Yeah, I've often made the observation, Rowe, that some people learn permaculture through permaculture, and some people deduce it in the same way that David and Bill did, because it really is just a common sense approach to responding to the ecological needs of the planet. So we meet a lot of people who are completely aligned with permaculture who've not necessarily heard the word.
Yes, that's right. But there are many permaculture is often a shortcut.
Yes.
Why should anyone have to draw out those principles of regen ag when I sat here and worked on it for days thinking, well, I'd seen and known and done, and the principles are there, and then put them into a table. Whereas indicators for a home garden, kitchen garden, are pretty easy.
Yes.
You'll have some animals, and you'll know your nutrient, and you'll know your water, and you'll have all that stuff together, the size and abundance, moving towards permanence. But when we get to agriculture, it's so vast that where are the principles that if you do them, you will conserve water and build soils and biodiversity? So that was the sort of thing I was doing right through. Then spent a lot of time contacting people who've been in permaculture for years, like Peter Bain in America, who was editor of their permaculture journal for 20, 30 years, he knows it, and said, how should we be teaching patterns? Because most people say, go and get a pattern from the gardener. Someone says, I like the wavy edge on this leaf. What we've done is give people a mathematical relationship, because patterns are ordered. We've talked about orders in terms of magnitude in the environment you're in, and we've talked about applications for each of the forms. Where would you use them? How would you use them? So we're very, very clear that the circle conserves resources.
Yes.
Absolutely clear. Dry lands, conserve water. Bush regeneration, conserve the edge so you don't have too much weed invasion. What are the applications of these forms? This isn't absolute, but how it will matter to work and design. So there's another one,
Yeah.
Water's in 2 chapters. We've got rural water being environmental water. We've spent a lot on groundwater because groundwater is being emptied at such a rate and polluted mining, really, it's immoral. It's really one of the great evils of the world, to push out billions of litres of water a day for something like uranium processing. And, you know, to empty those aquifers when the future might need them is a serious human transgression. And then we did a lot more on wetlands because their significance is now realised, and it wasn't in the early days. Forest, we brought together structure and function together, so they're clear. And then in windbreaks, we stopped talking about 1 row, 3 row, 2 row windbreaks. We're talking about small and big forests for different areas. Maybe a contour forest, maybe a coastal forest, but different from some of the concepts of forest in the past. So really, there's a lot. And we've spent ages trying to develop a proper marine permaculture, which begins with, you know, start where you are. Where are you in relation to sea? So there's you, Meg, and there's me up here in that. Everything I throw on the street is going to end up in the Nepean River.
Yes.
And that means if it's a liquid. So if I use toxins on my place and it rains, they're going to end up down at the mangroves. Everything ends up in the sea.
Yeah.
And regeneration begins on the land.
Well, it's one of the other things, of course, are those huge climate patterns that are determined by oceans. So, you know, it fascinates people in courses when we explain that even in the Blue Mountains, your proximity to the ocean is an important part of sector analysis. You're going to get offshore and onshore winds all the way up in the Blue Mountains.
But not only that, the fact that the mountains will give me orographic rain. You know,
Yes.
It rains up a little more than somewhere else because it's high and it condenses. But it's also 70% of Earth. 70% is huge, Meg.
Yes.
And we disregard it for most of our days and living unless we want to go for a swim or take a trip or say, isn't it terrible about the plastic in the ocean? But I feel as if we have to take on the ocean wherever we are, 3,000 kilometres inland, and regard it as our responsibility.
Yeah, it was a shock to me, Rowe, when we all started talking about marine permaculture, and I thought, we've been ignoring 70% of the planet. We've been talking about what's happening on the ground, and we've been ignoring the most significant part of the earth. Completely.
It is, I think, the most significant. We do get busy talking about the earth and the soils and everything, but once our climates go out because of the oceans, that really is the end. The climate wouldn't go out if only 30% were ocean, I think.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's this huge percentage of water and heat, and it absorbs CO2 the way trees do. And the response to a polluted and degraded ocean starts on the land with us, everywhere. Plant a tree today, you know, stop that bit of CO2 going into the ocean. And it's an explanatory boundary that's likely to be crossed, and it will have worse repercussions than we can think about. So I think that was absolutely necessary. Right? And also, I think we've got a whole chapter on incomes, Meg, because I find students often ask, how can I get an income or a livelihood from this? So I put a lot of thought not just into maybe secondary processing, but looking very, very hard at what you can do, what you're able to do, how you might think about it differently in life, how you might make a progression. It's really one tree, a permaculture livelihood, and you might try several branches.
Yes, and
but there are livelihoods.
Yeah, and Rowe, we're finding particularly with young people, they're applying that principle of having multiple functions supporting important elements, particularly in terms of employment, because the only way for them to survive is to have several jobs in different areas, and that gives them that resilience that if one job falls over, they've got something else to support themselves.
Yeah, that shows really well. It'd show well in a tree, wouldn't it? You've got a hand on several branches, or it could show in a pie diagram. So they're the sorts of things, and it means that the book is rewritten for every chapter. For example, there's nothing about air quality anywhere in Mollison and Holmgren.
Yes.
Now, it's a very wicked problem because air moves and there are no boundaries, and it requires individuals as well as government regulation, which is why we need to be getting with the UN and our local council as well to make sure that they understand that the solution's going to come from everywhere, not just them. So, you know, talking about air quality and talking about the need to manage it better. Someone said to me, you don't drive cars, but, you know, in Kashmir and in Kabul, you can't, if you go outside for more than half an hour in winter, and the fog and the air pollution, because people burn plastics to cook rice, people burn plastic to stay warm, and all the street people burn plastic, your lungs will burn afterwards for the next 4 or 5 hours. Just burn. So, you know, air quality, I'm trying to include things that have application for more than the 1%, so to speak, but it's not a book for development, it's just more inclusive.
Rowe, you've spent a lot of time in some of the harshest places on earth. I know you've taught permaculture in not just refugee camps but also staging camps. What do you think of the big lessons coming out of those locations?
I think the really big lessons are that people want it and see it as relevant. The second is that most people in difficult environments will work together better than where people are fairly wealthy and prosperous, suffered from real need, because, you know, tomorrow it can be me. It's that sort of thing. Or maybe this afternoon my kids will need a cup of rice or whatever. So that makes you lend and share a lot more. The other lesson is that this is going to be a reality for much more of the world in the future. And permaculturists will have to get skilled up on a chapter I put in called The Crowded Margins. And that means coming to terms with entirely different ways of teaching and techniques for dealing with small-scale crowded. People virtually without access to land as we would see it. Maybe not even a courtyard or a backyard, but they've got a roof and a windowsill and a bright, filthy black water system floating past. Look at it as places to do things. And we want to start a seed growers project in some of those places. We're talking about slums and favelas. We're talking about refugee camps. We're talking about migrant buildings with thousands crushed into high-rise buildings and often locked in. We're going to the ends of the difficult places, Meg, because we should always start with the poorest and least disadvantaged, and because that's going to be the future for more and more people. And what can happen to anyone else can happen to us.
Absolutely.
It's utterly ridiculous to think because we've got a lot of sea around us it can't happen here. Of course it can.
I agree.
So there's some of the things that I've been thinking about in the book, and I think it does make it a different book, but permaculture is strongly there.
Yes.
You know, the principles are there, the ethics are there, and by the way, I think you're right, the ultimate touchstone for permaculture is the ethics. And, you know, the principles are helpful in getting where we want to get. They're not the absolute truth of things because they can be subject to distortion. But the ethics, you can say, is it good for? And if it's not, then what else have you got? You know, I think that's a fabulous thing.
Yeah, thanks, Rowe. I'm just going to check in. I'm just going to check in with Sandy now, our moderator, to see whether anyone has any questions for you, Rowe.
All right.
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting myself there. Yes, there is a question from Rivergirl. Can we please ask Rowe when the latest updated version of the book will be available for purchase, please?
Do we have a publication date yet, Rowe?
No, but I suspect it'll be before Christmas, Meg, while we're sort of doing the last stuff and the drawings are ready and the formatting person's paid poised, ready to go. Look, I haven't tried to sell the book, Meg, but doing the book has opened up where permaculture has to go in the future.
Yeah.
And the backyard and the farm are going to be a tiny percentage of the people who need permaculture. And I suppose that is what pushed the book, and also the consolidation of things that may have been speculative in permaculture and have since been found to have strong evidence.
Yeah.
So, they're the things that pushed it. I don't care whether people buy a book or not, in a sense, even though, a year and a half or 2 years' work and a lifetime's experience, because I put things out mainly as a resource for people more than anything else. So I hope people don't think it's a sell. It's much more, these are the things that we must cope with if permaculture is going to be relevant. Otherwise, we lose permaculture.
Yeah, you've been working with, I noticed you've been working with Maura Gamble on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and you mentioned earlier about that alignment. What do you think people in the permaculture community can do in relation to those goals?
Yeah, thanks, Meg. So there are 17 goals. Some of them are not in permaculture, and I've thought about this too, but one we do not have is a goal, sustainable development goal for peace.
Yes.
And we don't have that. And I think what we can do to fulfill that goal, but it won't be evidence-based unless people see, is live our lives with, conflict resolution and fair assertiveness and defence of others to create peace and become known for that through our practice. So people say, oh no, they don't have a syllabus for peace, but oh my goodness, they're the people who live the peace. Mm. And I think that's one way of achieving a goal. It doesn't perhaps have to be ticking off. Now, where the goals are concerned, the SDGs, each one has about 160 techniques. When you look at that 17, energy, water, cities, and so on, forests, oceans, then they are what we call the foundations of permaculture. And when we build in our design, that is our structure. So when we're working out our gardens and our forest gardens and our forests, we are integrating and designing using all those separate topics.
Yes.
I'm not sure if that's clear, Meg, is it?
Well, I think it certainly is, Rowe. I mean, if I could reframe that, one of the things that struck me about the Sustainable Development Goals is that permaculture was very much the how of achieving them. That the Sustainable Development Goals have a lot of what about them, but that permaculture really, the great gift is we know how to do this stuff. We've got lots of evidence to support that we know how to do this stuff. And that for me was one of the big lessons of your work in some of the harshest places on earth is, this works in places where you've got contaminated soil and people burning plastic and a shortage of food, and it literally transforms the earth and saves people's lives in those environments. It's not just backyard hobby gardening.
No, that's right. It's actually transformative on scale of populations. So yes, permaculture's got evidence on the ground and has been going for nearly 40 years. India, Africa, it's a long, long time. It's not just the West. And the other thing is permaculture has a design method. UN has got the clout. So there are universities who set up SDGs. I was in a building of the University of Western Sydney at Lithgow with Liz yesterday, and there were the SDGs. So they're appointing officers. Now, if they can be drawn to permaculture, they will get much, much better implementation a lot sooner. But permaculturists will be able to draw on many, many of the techniques and that sort of governance authority of the UN. And we are putting together the next paper of how to register your project with the UN SDGs. And that will come out fairly soon, I think. So we've got a group of people working on that tomorrow morning from America, from Findhorn, someone who wrote the SDGs, range of people. And it's only 6, but they're smart. I just ask the questions. I don't know what to ask.
I think there's a skill in asking great questions, Rowe, don't you?
Yeah, I ask questions. I don't even remember all the answers, but that was all there written down. So the SDGs are worth being familiar with to draw on that little bit of oomph that some people need, I think. But remember, if we did all the SDGs in the next 5 years, we'd use up the total. We would put so much carbon into the air that we would actually cool the planet faster. So as we say, slow and sure solutions, or as I say, slow and only get bigger when you know it works without negative impacts. The SDGs are not a quick fix, and they will have to create the alternative renewable energies and water systems to be able to implement them. So, you know, it would be a mistake to just think, well, golly gee, this is great, let's run with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sandy, have you got another question now?
Yes, we do, from Paul. Can you, Rowe, could you talk a little bit about the alignment and differences of permaculture and regen agriculture, please?
What was that again? It's a little bit unclear.
Sorry, Rowe. The question from Paul is, can you talk a little bit about the alignment between permaculture and regen agriculture?
Yeah, okay. So fundamentally, only a few peoples in the world, a few traditional societies, because I studied this when I gave a national talk in 2011, only a few traditional peoples really lived sustainably. So if you look at those lovely pictures of the Italian and Greek women carting buckets of water and piles of stuff over treeless hills, they are living traditionally, but it's not really a pattern we want because humans destroyed that Mediterranean oak thing hundreds of years ago. Plato writes about it, 500 BC. So what we mustn't do is develop cultural romance with traditional people. But what we do have to do is look at where the water, the soil, the biodiversity was kept healthy and strong and good without pollution, such as Aboriginal people, the people in Rajasthan desert, some indigenous tribes in America, native tribes, people in old Borneo. They did not reduce the natural capital in any way, and they lived well. But I've been in the Tigris-Euphrates, which was the garden of the world, and Rumi and people wrote poetry about running water and grapes and fruit trees. It is up there, sand dunes. It is horrific. There's not a tree in sight, and you can't teach about the forest because people say, what's a forest? What's a forest? You can't do that in Afghanistan. So, you know, traditional systems have to be selected against criteria for being truly sustainable in the sense of not running natural capital or cultural capital down. Now, given that, regen agriculture has not really existed anywhere much in the world, except perhaps in Asia. If you go back and read that seminal permaculture book, Farmers for 40 Centuries, by F.H. King, written in 1908, he wanted to know how the fertility and yields were kept up in Asia, where in America in 1908 they'd collapsed. Like Australia, we'd wiped out the fertility fairly early on. So what we found was regen ag, well done practice design for windbreaks, for water supplies, and has objectives to build soil water, to build organic matter, to build soils and maintain biodiversity. Now, if you look at that and they're your goals, you can plant anything within your, more or less, the reach of your climate zone. You could run fat lamps, you can have milking animals, you can run industrial crops, but first and foremost, you've got to have that goal where you're looking all the time, am I losing soil? Am I polluting water? Is the groundwater drying up? Is the wind? So, you know, the permaculture design will get you to regen ag. When we look at the people who are doing that, and we talk about Fukuoka and that man in Austria, Sepp Holzer
Yeah.
and the American, what are they doing? They're putting enormous quantities, or they're putting sufficient quantities of nutrient back all the time. And so, you know how they do it in America. They bring in the cows, and the cows drop, and then they bring the chickens drop, and they might bring in the pigs drop. When they plant a crop there, the crop is going to minimally mine that soil. And when you look at the time they leave it on the land, they never let it get bare, so if it rains, it'll wash into waterways. It's a mixture of practices, regen ag, and close observation and design. It's far from being prescriptive.
Yeah. I noticed too, Rowe, it's yet another example of the accelerated pattern of succession.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It does, because where you're waiting to put in your nitrogen species or something, in this case you can use animals to bring, which is what the Vietnamese did. I remember saying to people, why did you buy pigs with your loan? And they stared at me blankly and said, well, because we've got to get the soil nutrient right. I thought, I hadn't understood that was the succession they wanted, was to build the soil before they even put in their vegetables.
Yeah. That's one of the, it's a standard of mine, Rowe, is to explain to people that the only thing I can successfully grow is soil. When people say to me, look at the pumpkin I grew, my response is, well, did you grow the pumpkin?
Yeah, that's right. No one grows a pumpkin.
No one grows a pumpkin, but what we're really good at, what we're very, very good at, is growing soil.
Create conditions. Yeah. But is that a satisfactory answer? Is it Sandy? Sandy, how did that suit?
That was Paul's question, and he's nodding. He's nodding enthusiastically at me, Rowe. Rowe, we're coming up to the end. I'm just checking. Have we got any more questions, Sandy? We're good. Thank you so much, Rowe, and thank you for having the flexibility to quickly shift to the alternative method when we couldn't figure Zoom out. It's a great pleasure to talk to you as always, and we sincerely appreciate you taking the time.
Well, look, thanks for the invitation, and look, very best wishes to everyone in that area of the world. It seems to be growing and impacting, becoming a really thriving bioregion. So I'm stoked with what all you're doing. Congratulations, everyone. Keep going, bigger, stronger, better, all the way, kinder, lovelier. Okay, and thanks, Meg. Thanks for the invitation to be on your program.
Thank you, Rowe, very much.
Okay, and the techies.